Good morning. I'm really tired. My kid is still testing positive for COVID and was up coughing last night. So I'm a little frazzled around the edges today, but I know you all will be fine with it. Welcome. It's Resistance Live for the 7th of February, 2024. Hello to all of our friends. Berkeley, Lakewood, Ohio. I already saw Brittany, France in here. Massachusetts, Maryland. I saw Texas. Hello from Somerset in the United Kingdom, or to Somerset in the United Kingdom, because I'm not there. Nice to see you all. Okay, so this is Resistance Live for, yes, as I already said, February 7th. I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Tongva territory here in Southern California. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a camel-colored t-shirt with a brown sweater over top. My hair is sort of pulled back. I'm messy today. Sorry, you guys. I have in my big, thick gold hoops. I'm a pigskin, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I'm in my office, in front of my plant, my bookshelf, and everything else. And I'm really glad you're here. Don't forget to like the broadcast. Okay, so yesterday was a day for the record books. I'm still having my Schadenfreude moment. I think a lot of you probably are as well, because it began, of course, with the breaking news about Trump not being immune from prosecution in the DC circuit. And it ended with an absolute implosion in the House of Representatives on a number of votes. And I don't know that it sort of historically could have been a worse day for the GOP. So we're going to talk about all that. I'm feeling actually quite optimistic about it. And actually, it didn't even end on that note. It ended with an incredibly hilarious situation in the Nevada primary, but we'll get to that also. All right. So first and foremost, I just want to talk about what's happening in the House, because first of all, I'm just going to tell you, I don't think that Speaker Mike Johnson is long for the role. We had a day yesterday where they couldn't pass impeachment of Mayorkas, which was something that they had sort of promised to Marjorie Taylor Greene and therefore to the far right base at the time that they took back the House in 2022. And this failure is, in addition to being hilarious, is obvious. But also, they were tied until one of the GOP senior leadership flipped their vote to no, which will then allow them to bring the issue back to the floor of the House. So somebody asked this morning on the Patreon feed why it was that they were talking about bringing back Steve Scalise, who is out on cancer treatment. And the reason is that they think they might be able to impeach him with one more vote. But I will just tell you that I think this whole thing has become so farcical at this point that there is not likely to be any really significant impact of an actual impeachment vote of Mayorkas if they manage to pull it off. I think it's DOA in the Senate. And fundamentally, all that's happened, hello, Jamaica, all that's happened in the last 24 hours is that they've shown once again their just rank incompetence as a party. I mean, they have control of the House of Representatives and they couldn't even whip the votes for this. And that wasn't the other thing that went down yesterday. The immigration bill that they demanded, we talked about this a bit yesterday and earlier in the week. The immigration bill that they demanded, that they said was their highest priority for this particular term, they then rejected out of hand. They've got people in their own party in the Senate chewing them apart. They have their own representatives like Chip Roy, of all people, on the floor of the House talking about how ridiculous this situation is. And then on top of it, they had a funding bill for Israel and they were short by 30 votes. I have to remind everybody that one of the big jobs of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, in addition to the House Majority Whip, is to whip votes. What that means is they're supposed to kind of propel people toward voting for things that are on their agenda. And before they bring anything to the floor of the House, if they want to look smart about it, they should know that they have the votes to pass it. I'm going to remind you all that this is one of the things that Nancy Pelosi was notorious for doing well when she was Speaker of the House. Literally yesterday, the Republicans had more losses on the floor of the House than Nancy Pelosi had in the entire, 6 years in total that she was Speaker of the House of Representatives. So it's just an incredible failure, and it's very public on the part of the GOP. I have to say that I laughed a lot about this last night because, frankly, I think they're getting what they deserve. Everything that they're doing is at the orders of Donald Trump. It's incredibly unfavorable. Many of their own people know that they can't even go back to their own districts to run on what's being done right now. They have nothing to run on. There are no accomplishments to tout. Again, they claimed they needed a border bill, and then they got one, and then they turned it down. And Biden gave a speech yesterday, right after we came off the air, saying, let's make no mistake about it. We gave them what they wanted, and now they're saying no. If the border is unsecure and they're claiming it's unsecure, it's their fault. And all of that is legitimate. I mean, in some sense, you couldn't kind of make up a worse scenario in a presidential election year, right? It's literally chaos, just like nonstop chaos. Okay, then we have to add to the top of that the fact that last night, Ronna Romney McDaniel, it was announced, is going to resign as the chair of the RNC. Now, you all remember that 2 days ago, Donald Trump made a statement that she should go. And apparently now, because, she's not running the party, he is, that's actually going to happen. I will say that, of course, one of the other things that's just so bizarre about this is that all of us have been complaining, or not complaining really, but noting that Ronna Romney McDaniel has been one of the most ineffective RNC chairs ever, because all she does is take orders from Donald Trump. Now he's decided that isn't good enough. She's going to quit, and they're going to put somebody else in who's even more of a kiss ass to Donald Trump's incredibly fascist agenda, which is losing. I mean, this is the other thing that we have to kind of be aware of. It's not like their agenda is a winning agenda. And he seems to be of the opinion that if he can just shove it down the throats of the American people a little harder, that then somehow people will swallow it. It's not going to work that way. So it's all very disturbing and simultaneously strategically wild to watch. I mean, this is not what you would do if you were actually willing to work to win an election. They're not doing anything to benefit the American people. They've thrown their own claimed agenda under the bus. They can't whip votes. They're losing on something that they promised when they took back the House in 2022, the Mayorkas impeachment. They've created their own crisis at the border. They've given the president who's running for re-election an incredible series of talking points. By the way, if you have missed it, Biden-Harris HQ, the digital response team on Threads, has a series of posts now that are here's what Marjorie Taylor Greene said was necessary in 2022. We desperately need a deal on the border. Here's what she's saying now, that we're not passing this border deal. There's no way. And they've literally got I don't know, maybe 6 posts of this with senior leaders of the current GOP talking about how this was number one on their agenda. And now they've thrown it under the bus. So they've really armed the Democrats and progressives in particular with an incredibly good set of talking points at this moment in a presidential election year. So I can't really complain about it. But I do think that it's going to get crazier from here on out. I think we're going to see a motion to vacate the chair for Speaker Johnson because he can't count and he can't whip votes. And this is a very public humiliation. I think that I don't know, man. There's just, they made their own bed. I don't know who else they're going to come up with, but this seems to be the way that it's going. And then on top of it, we've got a situation here where we're going to end up with an RNC chair who's even more far right on an agenda that nobody wants. So I don't know. It's going to be a wild few months as we head toward the Republican National Convention. And that's leaving aside everything else that's going on with regard to Trump and these trials and everything else, which we're going to get to again in a minute. It's an absolutely crazy 24 hours. Okay. Tomorrow, just in case you have not been paying attention, we have the oral argument in front of the Supreme Court on the issue of Colorado's ruling that Trump is off the ballot. Of course, the key issue at stake here is whether or not the third clause of the 14th Amendment prohibits someone who has participated in insurrection, who is an office holder of the United States, from running for re-election again or holding the office again. That is the issue that is at stake. The oral argument, the audio of it will be live streamed tomorrow on the Supreme Court's website. All the mainstream media sources are going to be live streaming it as well. I will just say that I think we're going to be in for a very interesting morning. We are going to be able to do some tea leaf reading, but I have to remind everybody that, we're not going to know how this comes out until they rule. I think the Supreme Court is very well aware of the urgency of this. So once again, I'm going to say I don't think this one's going to take very long, but it's going to be a real moment for the history books. And we've had a few of those already this week. So that's coming up tomorrow. And, I also just have to tell everybody, we still have yesterday's immunity ruling, which, reminder, Trump has a deadline now of Monday to appeal to the Supreme Court. Oh my goodness. I don't know. You know, when I started doing this 7 years ago, I thought it was intense then. Like this is a whole new level of wild on legal breaking news and analysis. But he has until Monday to appeal to the Supreme Court. Now, we did have a question about this on the Patreon feed earlier today. Reminder, if you are not yet a Patreon subscriber and this broadcast is meaningful to you, please consider it like an NPR subscription and go become a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistance-live. Subscription start as little as $2 a month and you can ask questions. I don't always get to every question on the broadcast, I have to say, but I try. And if I don't get to them, I usually am responding in writing on the Patreon feed. For those of you who are wondering why, like, sometimes I can't get to your questions, you should go back and check. But in any event, we had a question on the Patreon feed this morning about the issue of how many Supreme Court justices it takes to stay the proceedings versus how many it takes to accept the appeal. All right. So Columbia law professor, former Columbia law professor Hack goes on for a minute. I'm going to remind everybody, the way the cases get to the Supreme Court is on something called a writ of certiorari. It is not a given that you will have an appeal to the Supreme Court. The writ is essentially the means of asking the Supreme Court to take the case. To grant a writ of certiorari takes 4 Supreme Court justices to agree to hear the appeal. 4, okay? A stay, however, of lower court proceedings takes 5. All right. So this is where some of the confusion was coming up based on Lisa Rubin's commentary last night on MSNBC, because some people, I think, were like, well, why does it take 5 to stay it and only 4 to take the case? Them's the rules. That's basically the way that it works. Okay. But there's a lot of number crunching right now about how this could go. So listen, I'm just going to tell you all that I am in the same boat with all of the major legal commentators who think that there is a very strong possibility that the Supreme Court is not going to accept the writ of certiorari in this case because the DC Circuit's opinion is so airtight. I mean, I said this yesterday. You can go back and watch the broadcast, but it really is one of the most tightly drafted legal opinions from a circuit court of appeals that I have ever read in 30 years. It is so well done. There is no wiggle room. There is no room that needs clarification. There's no arena of it that runs contrary to precedent. It is a profoundly effectively written opinion. And so I don't think there is a strong likelihood that the Supreme Court is actually going to take this case. There's nothing for them to weigh in on. Like, it's very obvious how this should shake out. Now, if we're going to game the numbers on this and they do decide to take it, I have to remind everybody that they've got to have 4. And we have a 6-3 conservative majority right now on the Supreme Court. I think it's a given that Alito and Thomas would vote to take the case because, you know, we know who they are. We know they're ideologues, all right? But I've said this before. Everyone else is up for grabs. Now, I know there are a lot of people who think that Gorsuch would also be in that bucket. I'm not so sure. I'm going to remind everybody that, you know, we have had some rulings in the last year on issues related to voting and voting rights that have gone in favor of securing voting rights generally. And those have been based on provisions of the Constitution, strict interpretation of provisions of the Constitution. All right. So I'm not sure we have those 4 votes to take it in the first place. And if we don't have the 4 votes, we definitely don't have 5 to stay it. Okay. Now, I know there are some people out there this morning saying, well, it could be Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch. Then the question of whether or not to take the case is up to Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh. Many people think that Amy Coney Barrett is a no for reasons related to what we now know about the back end decision making on Dobbs and how she was kind of forced into voting to take the case when she didn't want to. So that would leave it hanging on Brett Kavanaugh, which is one of the reasons, by the way, why Alina Habba has been out there like directly talking to Brett Kavanaugh on Fox News and other media sources. I don't know. I really think this is a stretch that the Supreme Court is going to take this case. I think there is a strong possibility that it will be nixed and it will be like on a 7-2 line. And I'm just going to tell you all that if cert is denied, we're not even going to know why. I mean, we might, because I suppose there is an opportunity there for like the conservatives to write a dissent on why they're not taking cert, but that's very rare that happens. So I don't know. I'm not like holding my breath on that one, right? We'll have to see what happens there. I will just tell you, by the way, that one of the things that's very interesting about the DC Circuit Court's opinion, speaking of the intersection of these 2 cases, is that the DC Circuit's opinion makes it very clear that the president is an officer of the United States, which is one of the things that Trump is arguing is not the case in his brief on the Colorado ballot initiative matter. So how all this is going to play out, all these moving pieces are going to fit together is a really big question at this moment in time. But my suspicion is that we are not going to see the Supreme Court take this case. Now, we did have another question on the immunity case on the Patreon feed this morning about the issue of whether or not Trump participated in an insurrection. So again, let me go back and explain to you the procedural posture of the Colorado ballot initiative case. There was a trial at the trial court level in Colorado, where the trial court found that Donald Trump had participated in an insurrection. And that was a factual finding based on evidence and testimony and witnesses that were taken in that trial. Then the trial court concluded that it wasn't really the court to determine whether or not the third clause of the 14th Amendment applied there. It went up to the Colorado Supreme Court. They ruled, in fact, that it did apply and Trump was off the ballot. That was then appealed to the Supreme Court, which is how we landed at where we're going to be tomorrow. All right. The thing about trial court determinations on the basis of evidence is that they are ordinarily given a very high degree of discretion on appeal. So what does that mean? In essence, what it means is that because trial courts are the front line of evidence, they hear witnesses, they admit documents, they make factual findings on the basis of that evidence, and they are the most well suited to do that because they are the people who are actually like hearing the evidence itself. Same thing for jury determinations, by the way. Usually on appeal, those factual findings are not overturned unless they are plainly so out of line as compared to the evidence that the court decides to do so. And there are technical legal terms related to this, but what are called like standards of review. I went through these on a prior broadcast when the Colorado determination came down. I'm not going to go through all the various standards of review here. All you need to know is that in terms of trial court factual findings, a high level of deference is ordinarily applied by appeals courts. Now, does that mean that the Supreme Court might not go back and be like, well, we don't see that Donald Trump participated in insurrection? I mean, they could, but only if what's called a de novo standard of review applies, where they basically go back and review all the evidence anew, which is not the standard of review that's being advocated for here, or unless, again, the determination is so out of line with the evidence. So do I think that the Supreme Court is going to rule that he didn't participate in an insurrection? No. And actually, if you look at the question presented by the briefs, because reminder, when you appeal to the Supreme Court, you have to state the question presented that you are asking the Supreme Court to review. The questions presented are not targeting whether or not Trump participated in an insurrection. They're targeting whether or not the third clause of the 14th Amendment applies here. That's what it's about. All right. So the assumption I think is going to be, unless, the standard of review comes up tomorrow, whether or not, assuming that he participated in an insurrection, the third clause of the 14th Amendment prevents somebody from running for president again. All right. Now, we're going to have to see how this goes. All right. I mean, you never say never. I keep saying this to all of you like every day I'm on here, that litigation is unpredictable and you never really know how it's going to fly. But the standard of review here should allow for the factual determination of the trial court to stand, meaning it's a given that he participated in insurrection for purposes of evaluating whether or not the third clause of the 14th Amendment applies here. So we shall see. We shall see. I mean, the other thing I just want to say here, by the way, is that however this plays out, because I always have to temper expectations here, all right? Like, I think this one is a no-brainer, much in the way that I think the immunity issue is a complete no-brainer. We have strict constructionists, constitutional originalists on this court in the conservative majority. What that means is they take the Constitution as it's written. This is actually one of the reasons why they overturned Roe versus Wade, right? Because the right to privacy is not explicitly contained in the Constitution. And that determination was one of the things that informed the decision that, there isn't a national right to abortion all of a sudden after 50 years, because it's not actually in the Constitution. I have all sorts of things I could say about that. I'm very critical of strict constructionism generally as a doctrine under law. But this one is one of the places where it actually would work in our favor, because the third clause of the 14th Amendment is very plain in what it says. If you are an insurrectionist, you participated in insurrection against the United States, you can't hold office again, period. Like, literally it says that. So one of the things that I think folks should be prepared for here is that while we never know, this should not be a hard case. And they're going to have to really twist themselves in knots if they decide to make a determination that he should be on the ballot. And Even if they make that decision, I have to remind you all of other things. We now have a very airtight immunity decision out of the DC Circuit. Strong likelihood the Supreme Court will not take cert. If they do take cert, I will tell you right now, I think there's not a chance in hell they're going to overturn the decision, because it would mean, I have to remind you all, that Joe Biden could shoot Donald Trump in the middle of a Constitution Avenue and never be prosecuted for it, right? Like, that is not a likelihood that is going to come out of the Supreme Court. So one of the things that I want people to be really clear on here is that even if we lose on the issue of the ballot initiative, which is a very big if, I don't think that's how this is going to go. We still are going to see Donald Trump tried for crimes between now and November. And we're also going to be able to vote. Okay. So nobody spin out into doomsday stuff if it doesn't happen to go our way, which is a very, very, very big if. So listen, for the person asking the question about even local and state offices, the way that this plays out is if you have to swear to get your name on a ballot that you are fit for the office that you are running to serve, technically, the Constitution of the United States says that if you have participated in an insurrection, you cannot hold an office in the federal government again. All right. Now, there are state constitutions that have similar provisions. Some of this may turn on state constitutions, right? If you've participated in insurrection against the United States of America, you may not be qualified to run on the ballot for any office in the state of Colorado, for instance. All right. So some of this is based on the way that states' constitutions are written, the way they administer their own elections. That's one reason, by the way, why some states have already said he didn't have to certify that he was fit for the office to run in our state, so we can't take him off the ballot. But we can take him off the ballot in Maine. We can take him off the ballot maybe in Illinois. This morning, there's a move to take him off the ballot in New York State. Okay? So all of this depends on the kind of like local ways in which the language is written to get people on the ballot as well. All right? But if the Supreme Court rules that he is unfit to serve under the third clause of the 14th Amendment, full stop, the dominoes are going to fall. And, I will just say as well that I am really interested to watch how this is all going to play out between now and the Republican convention, because it's a mess. It's a mess. Like, I really still continue to have these moments where I'm completely gobsmacked by the fact that the RNC still thinks this is their guy, because it really is just like bomb after bomb after bomb going off inside their own house, and they still won't let him go. I mean, it's wild. It's really, really wild. All right. Okay. So Tucker Carlson is in Moscow interviewing Vladimir Putin. I think this has gotten way more air traffic than it deserves. All right. I'm just going to say something. Tucker Carlson doesn't have a show. He kind of airs these videos on Twitter, now known as X, and calls it a show. Is it kind of abhorrent that he's interviewing Vladimir Putin? Yes. Is he being fact-checked by the Kremlin in real time by claiming that no other American journalist has ever interviewed Putin? Yes. I mean, he sort of destroyed his own career, speaking of like following in the footsteps of the RNC. And I don't really, I don't know what anybody else expected from this guy, right? Like, he is a Putin apologist. The far right wing of the GOP are all Putin apologists, right? That's one of the reasons why they're trying to keep aid from Ukraine. So I don't know that I just feel like this is all getting like way too much airplay. He's going to do an interview. It's going to run on X. Whoop-de-doo. Putin's going to spout propaganda like he always does. I don't know. I mean, I have no expectations for Tucker Carlson at all. And I will also just say that at least the benefit of this is that he was fact-checked sentence by sentence live on the air on CNN last night. And we need more of that. So if the result of this is that we see more mainstream news sources literally playing video of Fox News and ex-Fox News and Newsmax figures spouting a lie and then pausing the video and saying, that's a lie and here's why, roll tape, that's a lie and here's why, roll tape, that's a lie and here's why. I mean, that's actually good for us. So, that's my 2 cents on that. All right. I'm not worried about Tucker Carlson. I mean, he's done basically anyhow. All right. Let's see what else. Somebody asked a question about whether or not Trump can be on trial in 2 places at once. So I have to clarify something for everyone, because even on the Patreon feed, there are a bunch of our really longtime followers who are very confused about this. While you have a right to confront your accuser under the Constitution of the United States in a criminal trial, you do not have to be present in the courtroom when you are being tried for crimes. And there are plenty of circumstances in which, in fact, defendants have been removed from the courtroom by a judge, or where a criminal defendant waives the right to be present. All right. It's not frequent, but it has been known to happen. So what does this mean for scheduling? Well, we know what Donald Trump's lawyers are going to do. They're going to claim that he can't be in 2 places at once, and then he probably won't show up for part of the trial. All right. None of that is going to be shocking or surprising. But I think that we are going to see arguments about whether or not the trials can overlap. So the way in which that's most likely to play out in the near future is on the issue of the trial that's starting in New York City in March. And then if the immunity case, meaning the January 6th case is returned to Judge Chutkan's courtroom, because there will be a debate about whether or not Alvin Bragg's case starting in late March will overlap with a trial schedule that, let's just say hypothetically, starts in May in Judge Chutkan's courtroom. And we're going to have to see how this all plays out. This is a big unknown right now that honestly depends on whether or not the Supreme Court takes certiorari, whether or not Donald Trump even bothers to appeal, whether or not there's a stay, whether there's not a stay. There's all sorts of things that could fall in this. Plus, then we have Fulton County in the mix. And will the Fulton County case overlap with Judge Chutkan's case? So there will be arguments about this in various courtrooms. I do not expect that Donald Trump is going to make an argument that's like, fine, he can be tried in 2 places at once. They will probably stand on the idea that he wants to be in court, even if he eventually doesn't show up, because we've seen that happen before. Also seen it happen with Trump's lawyers. Alina Habba claiming that she could be present in court, then showing up at the New Hampshire primary. We've seen this in the last 2 weeks. So I don't want anybody to kind of like think that it's a mandatory thing. You do have a right to confront your accusers, but is it possible that the court could schedule things that kind of overlap a little bit? Yeah, it's possible. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. Okay. All right. Let's see. We already mentioned that Ronna Romney McDaniel is resigning. I'm not going to touch on that anymore, other than to say that, you know, like she got in bed with the devil and she's getting what results from that. We'll have to see who gets nominated next. We did have a really interesting bit of breaking news yesterday out of Judge Engoron's courtroom in the New York State civil fraud case. Many of you were like, last he was supposed to rule by a week ago today, by January 31st. And then he announced that it was going to be like early to mid-February. And at the time, you will all recall, I don't like to do I told you so, but I'm going to say I told you so now. I said, I think the reason why this is being delayed is because there are these rumors floating around that Weisselberg's about to plead guilty to perjury for his testimony in the New York civil fraud case. And that would arguably impact how Judge Engoron is going to consider the evidence. Lo and behold, Engoron sends an email yesterday that says to counsel, I need to know whether or not Alan Weisselberg is pleading guilty to perjury, because it will impact whether or not I toss all of his testimony out in the course of this case. Okay, this does not bode well for the Trump organization. I kind of think that's a no-brainer. But if your CFO pleads guilty to perjuring himself about the valuations of the various properties at issue in the fraud case, and all of his testimony is tossed, that there goes a huge chunk of the Trump organization's and the co-defendants' defense. All right, so I called it. And I'm also going to say that one of the things that I do think this means is that the vast majority of Engoron's decision is written, but we're waiting on one more bit of information. So I think we're going to see this come to a conclusion within the next week. I think the real question here is, what does Engoron do with Weisselberg's testimony in light of the fact that apparently he's about to admit that he lied, that none of his testimony was reliable, and he's under threat of indictment right now for it. So we'll see. We'll see what happens next. All right. And, if he pleads guilty to perjury, we'll have to see what has been agreed upon by the prosecution in the context of a sentence. But that is a criminal matter vis-a-vis the New York civil fraud case. So I got to remind everybody, Engoron's not going to sentence anybody. He's a civil court trial judge right now in the context of the fraud case. All right. The prosecution or indictment or guilty plea of Alan Weisselberg is not pending before Engoron's court. And that's the reason why Engoron sent an email saying, I need clarification on this. All right. So that's what the delay is about. And, we're still waiting for the absolute end of Donald Trump's empire, which, by the way, is coming. So just sit tight. I think we all learned a lesson yesterday about trying to rush these things, because the DC Circuit's opinion was so solid that, many, even the people who were panicked, like Neil Katyal and Andrew Weissman were like, yeah, this was worth waiting for. Yes, it was. It was. And I have a feeling that Engoron's decision is also going to be worth waiting for. Okay. We had a very significant guilty conviction yesterday related to gun violence in this country. Many of you will remember this Michigan school shooting in November of 2021, where a young man who was having hallucinations and who was mentally ill, and who was making drawings that he was going to shoot up the school, was reported to his parents, who did nothing, and then on top of it bought him a gun 4 days before the shooting took place. And on the day of the shooting, were called to the school and refused to take him home, knowing that there was a gun in play, and that gun was in fact in his backpack. Yesterday, his mother, who, by the way, there was evidence that she texted him you got caught for shopping for ammunition on a school computer. You have to learn how to not get caught. Right? Absolutely abhorrent response from a parent. She was found guilty of 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter for failing to act fundamentally to prevent the school shooting that her son was signaling he was going to commit. On top of it, by giving him a gun and ammunition and taking him to a shooting range and teaching him how to use it. This is a historic verdict, and it's sending a very strong message to parents about the importance of not giving your children a weapon of war. I mean, I think this is a no-brainer. Many of us on our side of the fence think this one is obvious, but there has never been a verdict before where a parent has been found guilty of involuntary manslaughter due to their child's school shooting. And she can potentially go to prison for 60 years. Her son is already serving a life sentence. Her husband, who is charged with the same felonies, is going to trial later on this year. So this is a very, very significant judgment. I really hope this is a watershed moment in the context of gun safety prosecutions. And we'll have to see what happens next. I mean, I personally think that in light of her absolute callous disregard of the lives of the children and the teachers who he shot, knowing where he was. And, literally his journals were full of things like, no one's helping me. I'm not getting any help. My life is worthless. I'm asking for help. Nobody's giving it to me. My parents aren't giving it to me. It literally could not have been a clearer cut case of the parents knowing the threat and doing nothing. We'll have to see how that develops from the perspective of the sentencing, but folks should be aware that that was yesterday. All right. Final bit of schadenfreude for the day. So last night was the non-binding Nevada primary. There's actually 2 of them. And Nikki Haley lost. She was the only candidate on the ballot for the Republicans, and she lost to none of the above. And we know what's going on here, right? That there are people who are voting for none of the above are probably Trump voters. But I have to say, just look at how pathetic your campaign has to be to lose 61% to 39% to none of these candidates when you're running for the presidential primary in a significant state. It's really hilarious. I mean, and there's been a lot of joking about it this morning on Threads by George Conway and others. I mean, you've lost to none of the above. I don't even know how much worse it could look from an optics standpoint, right? But she's going to stay in the race, and that's fine. And I'm just going to flag for you all that I think there's still a strong likelihood that she's going to end up being the nominee. But the public humiliation of it has been well worth the wait. Yeah. So I think the big message from today is enjoy the schadenfreude while it lasts, right? I will be live threading the Supreme Court's oral argument tomorrow morning on the issue of the Colorado ballot initiative. But for today, I think that we all should just like take a pause and enjoy their self-destruction. And I reposted last night, Lindsey Graham's infamous tweet from May of 2016 that if we nominate Trump, we will get destroyed and we will deserve it. And, it may take 8-9 years to get to that point, but it's all in play. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. So that's that. All right, my friends. And I'm just going to say one other thing. I want everybody who's like, what are they going to pull next? I'm seeing some of these comments, all that kind of like another shoe is going to drop. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, please. And by the way, we know what they're going to pull next, right? The next thing that's going to happen is we're going to see more like claims about Hunter Biden. We're going to see claims that there's a massive caravan of brown people coming to the southern border to take away white Americans' jobs. By the way, if you all haven't followed this, there was this big event that was supposed to take place at the border this weekend on behalf of Trump supporters. You should go find the news reporting on it, but it is, if you want an extra moment of like cackling today, that will be it. Because literally what happened is all these people like came from all over the country and they're like Newsmax watchers and stuff. And they believed that there was going to be an invasion at the border. And they haven't seen anybody. They haven't seen anybody coming over. They've seen like maybe a mother and her 3-year-old child trying to cross the border. And that's it. There's no massive invasion of people. There's not a flood of people trying to cross the border. And now there's this moment of like awakening happening for some of these far right-wing white Americans of like, wait a minute. Trump told us that there was an invasion at the border and we were here to stop it, but there's nothing to stop. And then on top of it, there's like infighting. There have been like fist fights between people who are there for this particular event. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. So, and sad. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do feel really badly that like this huge chunk of America has fallen prey to propaganda and disinformation. And a lot of them are like grannies, right? But at the same time, you should go check out what's going on there. All right. I want everybody to just take the breather while you can, enjoy the day while you can. They are going to come up with other things to throw at the wall. There's no question about it. But I also will just say that there's a certain point at which the chaos becomes undeniable, even on their side of the fence. And they're clinging on by their fingernails right now. And I don't think things are going to go well for them in November. But we've got to keep doing the work. Don't get complacent. All right. I will catch you all here tomorrow, regular time. I will be live threading, as I said, the Supreme Court oral argument tomorrow on Threads. Please don't forget to thumbs up this broadcast. Don't forget to subscribe. If you like this, if it's serving you, please consider becoming a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistance-live. That helps to support our team behind the scenes who handles all the technical specs, handles all of our customer service issues, talks to you all on the back end on the Patreon feed. It also helps to support me in this work, which takes like 4 hours out of my workday these days because it's a lot more than just being on the air. All right. So much love to all of you. I will catch you all here tomorrow, regular time. And enjoy the moment while it lasts. All right. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. Bye.